Now let's discuss internationalization. How we approach our site's accessibility based on language and region is really important to ensuring our end users can access and interact with our site from wherever they may be and whatever language they may speak. So let's discuss some of the tools available to us in .cms to ensure that our website is appealing and accessible to users who speak various languages. Firstly, let's just talk about the languages that we might have installed here on our host. On the left-hand side in the Content Model tool group, you'll see Languages. I'll click on that, and here you'll see I have English and Spanish currently. But what if I wanted to add another language? Let's add French. If I click Add New Language in the top right, I can now add a new language. Now, we want to make sure that we're using the appropriate universal language code and country code for these languages. And then .cms should be able to pick up exactly what it is that we're referring to. So for French, the language code will use a lowercase fr. The language would be French, of course. The country code would be the capital FR, and the country would be France. Now, as long as I've put this in appropriately, once I click Save, this will reflect the appropriate iconography here and show me the French flag. So it looks like it did find that appropriately. Now, this isn't to say this has automatically installed the French language onto our site, but we have identified that we want to have French considered in our site. So how do we do that? Well, let's take a look at a piece of our content. Let's go to our content and let's look at, say, one of our activities. Let's take a look at our Photo Safari. Now here we can see our Photo Safari and all of the information related to it. And if we look at the top right of this window, we can see the language selected is English. Now, if I click the dropdown for this, I can now see Spanish and French. Before I could only see English and Spanish, but because I added French, that is now an option as well. Now, if I choose one of these other options, it doesn't automatically translate it for me. I could click Español, and it just says, hey, do you want to populate Español España content with English United States? I could say yes. Now, if I say yes, you'll notice it doesn't automatically translate it, but it does at least populate the content. Now, obviously, if I have my API set up appropriately, I could just go ahead and choose to translate this, or I could translate it manually. Either way, the changes I make here will be saved to my Español version of my Photo Safari activity. So let's do this. I'll quickly translate these values so that they will reflect appropriately for the language. And now I have manually translated all this. What I can do is go ahead and save this. And if I'd like, I could go ahead and do the exact same thing for French. So let's do that as well. So once again, it's asking me to populate that. And I could, yes, populate this from Spanish, but I probably want to consider this. I'll say no in this case. I'll go back to my English and choose French again. This way I can populate, or this way I can translate it from English. So I'll go back to English and then to French. And now it will ask if I want to populate this with English. So you'll notice the language you have selected when changing the language is what it will populate it with. So I'll go ahead and click yes. And now it has populated it with English. I will, again, manually translate this quickly. And now, once again, I've manually translated this. I'll click Save. And now I have a version of this page for each language. I'll go to English. We can see it there. I'll go to Spanish, etc. Now, let's see this in action actually on our site. So now if we close our activity and we go to our site browser, let's go and take a look at our South Africa page we created a while ago. I'll go ahead and open this. And now we know that we have this activity on this page. We have our Photo Safari right here. Now we haven't actually prepared alternate language versions of this page or any other part of this page, just that one activity. But I'll show you that this does work. If I click the drop down here at the top of the page in my preview, under English, I choose Español and scroll down, you'll see Safari Fotográfico. And there is our Spanish version. And again, if I click the drop down and choose French, we should once again see Safari Photo, and it is translated to French. So here we have essentially manually created alternate language versions of our activity. Now, there are a couple other ways to do this. Of course, like I said before, we have the translate options through an API. If you do set that up appropriately, you have an API key, you can do so. But there is another feature we can use here in .cms, especially in the case of certain terms, phrases, or verbiage that is used throughout the site. And these are called language variables. Let's go to our content tools group and then search. And here under type, I'll click the drop down, scroll all the way down, and we'll see language variable. Now, currently we don't have any language variables, but we can create some, specifically for certain terms or phrases that we're using all the time throughout our site. So if I click the plus sign in the corner, I can add new content, and we can create some variables here. Now, this language variable, once we set this up, will allow us to essentially always look at this term and use this replacement throughout our site. We just need to make sure that our key is set up appropriately and matches throughout. So for instance, if we said something like submit in our key, now in this case, we're looking at our English language version. So our value would be submit. Now I'll save that, but I'll switch over to my Spanish language version and I will populate it. That's fine. But then again, I will manually translate this. So now I have my Spanish version. I'll save that. And then again for our French. So once again, I will translate this. And now I have my French version. I will save. Now, anywhere that the word submit is being used, when we choose one of these other language options for that page or for that piece of content, whatever it might be that is using the word submit, as long as submit is used there as the key, it will automatically translate this for us using the language variable. Let's take a look at an example. I know for a fact that I have a banner here that's on our home page that we could apply this to. I've already created alternate versions of this page for each language. So let's go ahead and actually apply our language variable. Now, the way that we do this is something that you can find in our documentation site, and it's a specific little string of code that we can apply into really any of these text fields. So right here where it says button text, I'm going to go ahead and replace shop now with our submit. Now, to do that, I'm going to go ahead and type my $, and then text.get, and in some parentheses and quotes, I'll type submit, because remember, submit was our key. So this right here should work to pull in the appropriate language variable depending on the language that is selected. So now that I've added that, I'll publish it. I'll go ahead and select Spanish, and I'll do the same here. I'll publish that, and finally French. I'll apply this here again and publish that. So now that they are all published, they all have the text.get with submit as the key. That should reach out to our language variable and pull in the appropriate language. So going back to our site browser, if I now go to our homepage and open our index, here we can see it in English. It says submit. If I click the drop down here, change it to Spanish, we should see enviar. And in French, we should see valider. So now we know that we have our language variable working appropriately. That's just a simple example of how you could use this. Obviously, you could use this in many different ways, many different areas within your site, within templates and contentlets, however you see fit. Those places where you're going to be using a lot of the same verbiage throughout your site. This is going to be very helpful and save you some time.